Hello friends, my name is Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we're taking a look at some retro sports cars and we are going to be kicking things off with the BMW M3. This particular model is an E36 generation M3. It has 321 horsepower, 258 foot-pound of torque and weighs 3,219 pounds. Out of all the M3s, the E36 is probably my favourite of all of them in terms of just styling. It's sort of my favourite, and I've never really been a fan of any of the ones after this. You know, the E46 and the E92 really aren't my sort of thing, but I do rather like the E36. And of course, these M3s are known for being pretty good handling vehicles, some of the best driving sports cars in the business, and as far as driving it today, yeah, it's pretty decent. I do like it. It is a pretty neutral handling car. I've discussed these before on this series, where essentially they just, they don't really offer themselves up to either understeer or oversteer. You know, they just sort of feel like pretty natural vehicles. The M3 is like that, although it does of course slide a little bit when you push it. You will certainly get this thing sideways, but it is a fun car to drive. Nonetheless, I did like my time with the E36. It's a pretty good introduction to sports cars, and if you just want like a sports car, you know, you're not really thinking, you're just like, oh, I want a car to drive, an M3 really you can't go wrong with, and the E36 generation especially, just because I do think that's a better handling car than the E46. Anyways, next up we have the Nissan Skyline. This is the R33 model, 278 horsepower, 271 foot-pound of torque, 3,393 pounds of weight. This is an all-wheel drive car, one of two all-wheel drive cars here today. Interestingly, both all-wheel drive cars are Japanese. Just like the E36 is my favourite generation of M3, the R33 is my favourite generation of Skyline GTR, I guess. Between the R31 and the R33, I do flip-flop between the two, and the R32 in recent years, I've started to really like the R32 as well, but I think the R33 is still my favourite. As far as this car is to drive, it's good. It does have some mild understeer. The gearbox on it isn't great either. It's a little bit long. Sort of most of the cars here today do have longish gear ratios, which is a little bit of a shame, but the R33 is notorious for having not a particularly good gearbox. But yeah, honestly this car does drive in the wet kind of like a Subaru or a Mitsubishi would, you know, where they have understeer, but they're pretty planted cars and pretty good cars to drive. You know, just like the E36, this is a good default choice car if you just need something to build quickly for a race series. You can't really go wrong with building a Skyline, although I'd probably maybe build like an R32 just because they do have slightly better handling. Next up, okay, right, I must explain myself here. We have a Honda S2000, 257 horsepower, 162 pounds-foot of torque, 2,813 pounds of weight. This is the lightest vehicle here today, least powerful vehicle, and the least torquey. Now, yes, I appreciate this is a 2009 car, which is not retro or at all. However, the Honda S2000 was first introduced in 1999, and, you know, that's kind of retro-ish. And to be completely truthful, I had no other ideas what to use for this episode, so you're getting the S2000. Just pretend it's the 99 model, if it irritates you that much. Anyways, the S2000, what is it like to drive? Handling wise, it is really rather excellent. These are fantastic handling cars, are the S2000. You know, I've driven a fair few of these, you know, for various different things, building them up. I've driven them in Forza Top Gear laps countless times, and they've always been really dependable machines. However, while they do have excellent handling, they are unfortunately quite slow when it comes to most of the sports cars. As far as everything here today, it's the slowest car in a straight line by a mile. Which is a bit of a shame, you know. If this thing had a bit more straight line speed and kept its sort of really good handling, this thing could seriously be worrying some even more higher powered vehicles, but as it stands, it's just a little bit slow, but it is still a pretty excellent handling car. Next up, we have the Mitsubishi GTO, 320 horsepower, 315 foot-pound of torque, 3,704 pounds weight. This is the heaviest car here today. Unsurprisingly, the GTO really is an extremely heavy vehicle. I'm not too sure as to why it's as heavy as it is. I guess it's a luxury coupe, but yeah. Anyways, of course, the GTO does have a good comparison in this episode to the R33. You know, both these cars are kind of similar, all-wheel drive, relatively powerful, Japanese tunery sports luxury. Is the R33 a luxury car? Kinda, I guess. You know, they are sort of in that ballpark. The GTO, as far as its sort of its driving characteristics, it isn't as good as the R33. It is understated, and it pains me to say that because I love the Mitsubishi GTO. Not this particular generation. I'm not, you know, this generation's like, no, it's okay, it's cool. You know, for me, the 99s, the VR4 Turbo, that's my ultimate JDM car, essentially. You know, that's my favourite of all the Japanese cars. But you know, this model is still pretty cool, but yeah, it's just understeery is really the way this drives. It isn't as good as the R33 handling wise. Of course, it does have a little bit more straight line speed thanks to 320 horsepower, but you know, the weight advantage that the R33 gains, you know, it really is a toss up as to which of these cars is quicker in a straight line, and honestly I'd probably go with the R33 if I was, you know, purely racing. Next up, we have something kind of interesting. We have the Maserati Ghibli Cup. 326 horsepower, 273 foot-pound of torque, 3,009 pounds of weight. The Maserati Ghibli is a pretty interesting vehicle with a pretty interesting name. This was a pretty successful race car from what I remember. This was like raced in a few GT series. I believe it even had a one-make race series of its own. It is powered by, I believe, a turbocharged V6 motor. It does make a really rather good noise. This is probably the best sounding car of everything here today. As far as it is to drive, it's a pretty solid vehicle to drive. It's fairly neutral. I gotta admit, for the first couple of laps I did in this car, I could never really figure out sort of what the handling is. It does, kind of like with the E36, you know, it does correlate more on the side of oversteer, but you know, overall it is a neutral car. It's a pretty good handling car. It handles like something that could do really very, very well if it was built up to a class. I don't know, the Ghibli unfortunately is a bit of a forgotten car, especially with the 97, but you know, if you was to build this thing up to sort of like a C-class, B-class racer, I can imagine these would be pretty decent cars. So give that a try if you're looking for something a little bit different to run in a lobby. Next up, we have a Chevrolet Corvette C4 ZR1, 405 horsepower, 385 foot-pound of torque, 3,505 pounds of weight. It is the most powerful vehicle here today. It's also the torquiest vehicle here today, and it is our only American car here today. I guess you could argue the C4 Corvette is technically more a muscle car than a sports car, but this is the ZR1. So, yeah, the ZR1 is sort of a more track-focused vehicle. It's got a Lotus-built engine, I believe, this as well. Or is it a Grand Sport? I don't know. Anyways, the Corvette. Now, I've driven these things for Forza Top Gear laps in the past, and I honestly think in the dry this is an absolutely excellent handling car. In the wet, it's still very decent. It's still a really good car to drive in the wet. Yeah, the weight... I'm starting to feel the weight of the Corvette, and it is a little bit wallowy. Admittedly, this is, in terms of actual game time, this is actually the oldest car here today, so having a bit of wobble on the suspension's kind of expected, but yeah, it doesn't handle quite as good as I remember it doing, but it's still an absolutely great handling car. If you just give it a try, give the C4 Corvette a try, and seriously experience the handling of this thing, because it's really rather weird, and I don't know how it does what it does. Anyways, the final car for today is the Lotus Esprit V8, 350 horsepower, 295 foot-pound of torque, 2,851 pounds of weight. The only mid-engined sports car here today. Of course, the Lotus Esprit, one of the more famous, some people say this is a supercar. It's not a supercar, really. You know, it is mid-engine, but it had like 4-cylinder engines for the longest time. This V8 only really came out in the last couple of years, so yeah, not a supercar. So that's why it's here. but the Esprit is a very famous car indeed, and they've always been known for having pretty decent handling, and well, this car really rather good handling. It will slide if it feels like doing through the corners, it shall. The one thing I noted with this car is it's quick. You know, compared to everything else here today, it has the best power to weight ratio. It's the second lightest car, and even then not by much. And it is the second most powerful, so it does have the best power to weight ratio here. And as a result, in a straight line, this thing is the quickest thing here today. Maybe not the best handling car, but it's certainly up there, you know. It's not a bad handling car by any stretch of imagination. It is a pretty well-rounded vehicle overall, and I liked it a lot. Anyways, moving on to the board, the Esprit V8 is actually the fastest car today, going 76 with a 126.126, just misses out on a BMW M3 Coupe and a C63S Coupe, so it's up there with a bunch of modern cars, which is kind of ironic. The Corvette C4 goes in 78 for 126.241. As usual in the C4's sort of physic-bending ways, it's quicker than a bunch of stuff it probably shouldn't be. You know, the F355 Berlinette is quicker than a Charger Daytona. It's a weird car, the C4. Moving down the board some more, we find the R33 in 98 for a 128.761. A little bit off a Chevrolet Super Sport. It is a bit quicker than a WRX. Interestingly enough, slower than an R32, although really not by much at all. Moving down once more, the E36 finds itself in 108th with a 129.168. Which is a decent enough time, beats the Fast and Furious Eclipse, beats the BMW X6M, a little bit off of an Evo 8. And finally, we move on to sort of the contingent of today's cars. The Mitsubishi GTO is in 121st place with 130.141. Just misses out on a BMW M1, and it's not actually that far off a Toyota Supra, which is kind of interesting. The Maserati Ghibli goes into 122nd with a 130.190, does beat the Nissan 350Z and a Porsche 944 Turbo, which is pretty good. And the Honda S2000, unfortunately, despite being such a good handling car, is the slowest car today, going to 125th with 130.226, but that's still not bad. It beats a modern-day Volkswagen Scirocco R, Porsche Macan Turbo, and Audi Quattro. Yeah, pretty respectable times from all of these retro sports cars. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching. My name has been The Real Emile. Join me next time when I'll take a look at some modern sports cars. So join me for that. Thanks for watching, and until next time, friends, farewell.